Good evening, Charlie.
Hi, Ross. How's it going?
How are we doing, my man? Welcome to... I've still got music in my ear, Charlie. I've still got music in my ear.
Wait.
Hold on a second. We've got some technical difficulties.
I haven't mastered this yet, obviously.
He's a producer in training. Charlie Velasquez joins me. My name is Ross Devonport. Welcome to episode 4. It is episode 4, I think, right? Of Talking Florida Rugby Occasionally. Again, my name is Ross Devonport, referee assigner, color voice of Rugby ATL, who completed their first ever draft yesterday. Did you watch any of that, Charlie?
I did a little bit, but to be honest, I don't really know most of these guys, so it was like watching, mystery.
Yeah, no, there's only 2 rounds in the end, which was reduced, I think, from 4. But yeah, it was interesting, decent production. We obviously saw it was the first ever draft, so it was something historical. Did you watch any of Super Rugby? I'm not even going to try and pronounce the name. I'm just going to call it Super Rugby New Zealand. Did you watch any of that yesterday?
I had a hard time spelling that. Yes, I actually did watch it last night. It was just weird to be watching live rugby, because you can watch rugby, but knowing it's live, it's just like, wow.
It was very strange. And of course, I'm jealous of all the New Zealanders down there who got to watch it live in the stadiums. I think they had 20,000 at the first game, perhaps even more in the second game at Eden Park, which I still need to watch the second half of. But a lot of whistles, referees really cracking down on things that they were supposed to be cracking down the whole time. But it was a very interesting experience watching those 2 games. And yeah, it's great to see rugby back.
Yes. And we have to talk about this guy we have at the bottom of the screen, because we have a little sponsorship today, which is going to help with the quality of the podcast.
We do have a sponsor today for this 4th episode. Joining us today will be the management of FRU, Kerri O'Malley, the president and then the general manager of the FRU and the FYRU, Evan Haigh. But yeah, today's episode of TFR is brought to you by Chris Ream, who is a referee. Most of you may have had him as in the middle for your games, and also the life insurance guy. Now listen, referees can be annoying. Life insurance guys can be even more annoying, but Chris is less annoying than most. Seriously, we're lucky to have him. He's a solid ref and one of the best life insurance guys anywhere. Call him if you want a policy review. You can find info about Chris and his certified financial planner services he provides at lifeinsuranceguy.com, or you can call his office on Federal Highway in Fort Lauderdale at 954-239-7344. His son, Max Ream, who I think, if I'm correct, was a national champion with UCF back a few years ago. He also works with his dad, Chris, down there. So if you want to support a rugby organization and you need some life insurance or perhaps some financial planning, go to lifeinsuranceguy.com. And obviously a big thanks to Chris for helping out our little podcast here, helping us with I got myself a new microphone, so hopefully I sound a little clearer than I did the first 3 episodes.
Yes, you do.
And obviously if you'd be interested in sponsoring our little venture here, obviously all funds going towards things like the new improved microphone I've got. I know Charlie's got one on the way as well, so we should sound a little better. Hopefully at some point I can move out of my daughter's bedroom. I've been, I think, in my sister-in-law's bedroom. I've been at my office and now on the other side of the house, and now in my daughter's bedroom just because of the chaos that is my house. But yeah, thanks again to Chris Ream. And yeah, if you'd like to be interested in sponsoring us, please reach out to me or Charlie via Facebook or cell phone or email, however you may have our contacts.
I just want to say quickly, if you
go ahead, Charlie.
Allow me, personally, I want to thank Chris, because he's one guy that he has supported rugby in Florida.
Yes.
Rugby FL since the beginnings, many times. So I really appreciate that. I just contacted him and he said, yeah, sure, whatever. And so thank you, Chris.
No, it's great to see. Listen, I think anybody that's played rugby around the country and the world appreciates what rugbyfl.com does for the Florida rugby community. I know there really isn't another rugby site locally like it in the country. And it's great to see great to support those that support Charlie. So yeah, if you have any life insurance questions or financial planning questions, please get in touch with Chris. All right, Charlie, let's get to our show. My esteemed producer, Charlie, is going to sort of jump into the background here as we get into our episode 4. Now, today's guests, you might know the names if you've been around Florida Rugby for a little while, but I have a feeling that many of you in the state have never met them, know much about them, or what their exact roles are with the FRU. So that's the reason I'm having them on today. So first of all, let's welcome FRU. That's the Florida Rugby Union. For those of you that aren't familiar with what that means, our president, Kerri O'Malley. Kerri, live from her backyard in either in Gainesville, Florida, or just outside of beautiful Gainesville, Florida.
Welcome.
As we were mentioning, we really have Florida, and then we have South Florida. So Kerri's in one of the true lovely parts of Florida, Gainesville, where I've been lucky to visit a couple of times to play rugby and to watch some football. Seem to remember FAU giving the Gators a good run a few years ago on the football field, going to overtime. But we won't mention that because FAU didn't win. But welcome, Kerri. Thanks for joining us this evening.
Thanks for having us.
How is everything going with you in this strange time we find ourselves in at the moment?
I don't want to say it's terrible, but it is definitely challenging. We've been I've been working at home with 2 kids, and
always fun.
Yes, and actually, the restructuring of USA Rugby has actually taken more time.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I know we'll probably talk about that later, but yeah, things have not slowed down.
Now, you have a biology background, so how many people have just been giving you general questions about this whole COVID thing? I know it's not exactly your area of expertise, but I'm sure people see, oh, Kerri's has all these certifications and these degrees. Maybe she must know what's going on.
Well, I actually have a PhD in immunology, which is
yes.
Fights off disease, and I did a fellowship in trauma and sepsis. And so there are a lot of similarities between coronavirus and sepsis in terms of the cytokine response. But I try to not give people medical advice because I'm not a medical doctor, or I am also not an epidemiologist or a virologist. So.
Gotcha, but you know more than many of us, so I'm sure you get plenty of those questions. I'm going to ask you when we get to that stage about when we think rugby might return. But yeah, you just mentioned you have a biology background, originally from Pennsylvania. You came down here, I think, for your continuing studies. You started playing rugby as an undergrad in Pennsylvania?
I did. I started my college team with one of the women that lived in my hall. Awesome. So we started our team. I guess we started organizing my sophomore year, and so we started a college team at Albright College. It's about 1,200 undergrads. So what was your rugby background before that? You just wanted to start a team, but did you have any rugby background before that? No, and we went to a match, and I had not seen rugby played before. I mean, we're going a while back. Right. It's almost 20 years ago, over 20 years, whatever. So we went to a match, and I just loved it because I grew up in a football house. So right. It actually was. Our college football team wasn't very good, so it was very fun. And then we went to the party, and I was like, oh, "This is even better." You play this game and get to do this party? We need to do this. And I didn't know that there were women's teams, and there was a guy, Andy, that lived near Westchester, and so Westchester women had a team, and he said, "Oh, there are lots of teams starting up," so we decided to do it.
Awesome. That's definitely a strange path. It's great that, as somebody that never played the game, starting up your own team. That's awesome. Now, you obviously said
terrible. Like our first game, it was 15
doesn't matter.
People that have never played before.
But it doesn't matter, right? That's one of the great things about rugby. You can bring people together and have some fun and hopefully not get hurt, and then go have a drink with each other afterwards. Now, you said, what position did you play? Charlie and I had this question for you beforehand, and I couldn't. You probably mentioned it to me before, but we couldn't remember what position you played.
So in college, I played hooker. My saying is I play hooker on a good team and loose forward or scrum half on a bad one.
Versatile. We love it. Mm-hmm. Now, how did you get into obviously you got into coaching a little bit, and then you obviously got into the union, I think, as you said, as a secretary. So how did the coaching and getting involved in the FRU come about?
So the coaching started because when I had moved to Gainesville, there was no women's team, and it was right around the time where they were getting more strict with college eligibility. I had recently moved here. I think I had played like for the EPRU under 23s and tore my MCL before moving down, and I thought, I'm done. I'm retired. I'll just coach. And so I started helping out with the UF women, and then I went to, I think I have like a story from Beerfoot where I met Ken Simmons.
It's where everything happens.
Yeah, I know. And I met Ken Simmons, and Ken was the president at the time. And he was like, oh, you should come to a meeting. We want people that are this enthusiastic. And so Ken kind of roped me in Ken is great at that. So I don't know. I think everybody knows Ken Simmons. And so I have Ken to thank for being involved with administration.
Yeah, I mean, we talked to the referees last week, and I think 3 of them ended up with Kenny Simmons getting them into reffing. So we're going to have him on his own episode at some point. But Ken's great at he is a Florida legend of rugby. But being up in Gainesville, a lot of people in the South Florida area don't know who Kenny is, and I'd love for them to learn about him. He's a Fort
Lauderdale guy.
This is true. I always forget that part. Yes, this is true. But the younger people may not know who he is.
No,
So you started as secretary as FRU, and then when did you start as president?
I started as president in 2013. So it was secretary, and then stepped down from secretary and didn't do anything for a while. I helped like Les Davidson with like the under 23 team when we had that. And then I served as discipline chair. Yeah, I did like that. That was enjoyable. It's always interesting to be on the other side. And then I became president in 2013 when we formed the Geographic Union, when that essentially meant that Florida was no longer part of the South.
Of the South,
so part of that movement.
Right now, you find yourself as president still now, and obviously it's an elected position. And how would you describe your role in working with the union and the clubs, as well as working with Evan in his position as general manager?
So one of the reasons I was interested in becoming president, and I'm going to be pretty honest tonight, more so than I probably would be. I know, yeah. And so I didn't really think that things were fair. No discredit to the administration before me, and it wasn't necessarily unfair at the Florida level. I felt like, it sometimes things seem like a good old boys network. It seems like what's okay for this club, same exact thing for this club. It's not all right. And so so I was interested in kind of doing a little bit more, and I think Franklin was ready to stop, so it kind of worked out. And so I've enjoyed it. I think finding good people to work with is, I think, one of the hardest challenges.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So you joined Florida sort of a time of transition as we became our own GU, and now you're finding yourself in perhaps another bit of transition with the way USA Rugby is going. But we'll get to that later. So thanks, Kerri. And let's get to our next guest who's going to join us. We'll get back to Kerri with some of these questions we have for her and Evan. Now we're going to be joined by Evan Haigh, who is the general manager of the FRU and the FYRU. Evan, how are we doing, my man?
Good. How about yourself, Ross?
I'm doing all right, hanging in there. You're up in Orlando, I assume? Yes, close enough?
Yep, in Orlando. Yeah, they're in the area, the greater Orlando area.
Now, obviously, originally, if you can tell by the accent, originally from Australia, you played a pretty serious level of rugby there for the ACT Brumbies, and then moved here to the US. You obviously came to a pretty serious part of rugby country in America, which is Seattle. So talk about how you ended up in the US in the first place and some of your experiences up there in the Northwest.
Yeah, I was kind of finished my university degree. I was working for the Brumbies and playing kind of B-side and representative kind of ACT area, and I was ready to travel, and most of my friends were doing England and Europe, and I wanted to do something a little different. So I decided I would reach out to a bunch of Super League clubs at that time, which is kind of was the predecessor to the MLR, and they looked after and found me a place to live and got me some flights and then just looked after me, and I decided that was a really cool idea, and Seattle was a really neat point to go, and I stayed there probably originally for 8 months, and played Super League, played a full season of that. We were not very good, but we had a lot of fun and we traveled a lot. but I learned a lot about the kind of the American game at that point. And then I went to England and Scotland for a couple of years, and would come transitionally back and forth between Seattle and played a little bit down in San Diego for on-back in the Super League as well. And in 2008, I decided that I think I got offered a job in Seattle, and I wanted to kind of move here and get a job. So I got hooked up with a really nice job, and kind of worked from there into being the Seattle kind of player coach component. Proceeded to get injured backwards and forwards a lot. So I spent most of my time coaching rather than playing, but it taught me a lot about coaching. So it was really fun, and coaching at that level is definitely has its challenges, because there's huge money on the table in terms of, you know, the travel that we had to do, and we had to fundraise for all of that, and we had good old boy support. So you learn a lot about that, and a lot of the players that were involved at that level and the coaches and all of that are still very much highly involved at all levels of USA Rugby now. So I hold a lot of those relationships from that, which is really neat.
Awesome. And I know you worked, for those of you that don't know, you also worked for Florida Rugby.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that organization, that for those of you that don't know about it, those that may not know about it, and how that experience was.
Yeah, so Rugby was a very interesting experience. It's a startup organization. At the time, Waisali Sarevi, the Sevens guru, came to Seattle, helped us coach a little bit. And my boss at the time, who I worked for in insurance, decided that he wanted to start a business around Sarevi and kind of get a bunch of investments and to do all of that. And then so I jumped on board to help them kind of get that going as the programming director, and we just went around the country and ran camps. I ran camps in Miami, I ran camps in Orlando, obviously ran camps all over the different parts of the country, and that was fun. And we went to Bermuda numerous times, Cayman Islands, lots of really fun trips. Awesome. Hong Kong. We built a company around that. They also at the same time started to get into football and teaching how to coach rugby players how to tackle in football, and that kind of transition actually became more profitable for them. So I think, from my understanding, since I've left, they're not really doing much rugby anymore, and they're really focusing most of their energy on football, and have rebranded to Adivus, I believe now. So that's their company. But it was a really neat concept to what we did, and it was thoroughly enjoyable.
Now, obviously, you come from a rugby hotbed up there, for decades in Seattle. When you played for all Puget Sound Beach, and it's one of the biggest rugby areas in the country. And then suddenly you find yourself in Florida. Is still one of the, at that time, definitely still one of the growing rugby communities in the country. How did you find yourself down here?
Yeah, so I met my wife in Seattle. Her family all live here in Orlando and are from Orlando. So we were finding ourselves traveling backwards and forwards a lot. And she wanted to go back to school and do some kind of her master's degree. And this is the place that she wanted to do it. And we said, let's do it. Let's move down here. And at that same time, that's when Kerri kind of came on as the president, and Ronnie Suarez. Both Kerri and Ronnie were instrumental in kind of creating a position that they both needed to have. And I so happened to be really interested in moving here and had really good relationships with them. And it was a perfect fit for at that moment. So I got really lucky within that. And I feel really blessed that I had someone like Kerri and Ronnie who had my back, and to really could see the vision of what we were trying to do from the union, which was really neat.
Gosh, now obviously as I mentioned, Kerri is an elected president. You're a general manager now. Is it a contracted position, or is it just a sort of a one year by year, or how does it work with you in your position? And do you work under Kerri or alongside, or how does that whole system work?
So it's a contracted position. We every year kind of do a review, basically in the board meetings. It's usually around the budget time. Kerri can probably walk through us a little bit more around that, but they do kind of a board review and discuss different things around it. But I wouldn't say there's a time length on the contract. We just have an agreement of how we work it and how we deal with it. We have a pretty clear understanding of how it works. And I generally don't like to, I guess Kerri is my boss. I would view her that way, but she doesn't treat me like that at all. We're very much equals, and I'm there to help and assist and to really drive things forward, to help the board achieve more and to get more done and to really drive the game forward as best we can.
No doubt. And before I forget, Ronnie did want to mention your national championship in sevens before I skip on to the rest of the questions. So well done on that. We obviously had a bunch of national championships here as well over the year. Kerri was a Division II national champion with Orlando. We've obviously had Crew and UCF over the years. So we've had quite a bit of success in Florida, even though some people don't give us as much credit as we should. Now, Kerri, let's get on to sort of the general state of the union. I know I gave you some sort of questions before a couple of days ago. So Can you give us a sort of perhaps a general state of the union? Let's maybe not get into sort of the USA Rugby side of things for a bit here, but just as a union, how is Florida doing? Finances, membership numbers, etc.
Okay. Yeah. So we so I have like two answers. So I can give you our most up-to-date answer as of last summer, because our membership numbers, we usually report them at the end of, say, like the year.
Like the season, yeah.
Yeah, so we usually do that. And so I would say that our numbers were pretty stable. There wasn't really anything that exciting in terms of growth or loss. We did have some loss in the college women's game. I think it was about 4%. And that reflected what we saw nationally. So we had just gotten back from the NDS last summer, the National Development Summit, and got to see our numbers compared to everybody else's across the country. And so that was one area where things were kind of down. And then financially, well, and then I'll say that the reason we couldn't pull the numbers is because of the USA Rugby kind of
the mess.
The system, the system they were using where we would pull our numbers from is no longer functional. And so we wouldn't have up-to-date numbers. And then financially, I actually think that we're in a good spot because one of the things that has been a priority for the board up until now, I mean, we kind of have a newer board now, but we really tried to have a reserve fund. I don't want to call it a rainy day fund, but it was essentially up to a half year's operating expenses. And when we wanted to do it, everyone thought we were ridiculous. Not the board. The board was Matt, the former treasurer, is really good with money. And everyone kept thinking, like, why do we need this? And I think that we're now seeing that the reason we need it is if we have a reason where we can't collect dues, which is kind of what keeps us going. If we can't collect dues, we'll wind up like USA Rugby. We can't pay the bills because. So I think that we're doing well. I would say some of our membership numbers are down. We think our money's down because the season's ended prematurely and people would have still been registering people, including for the summer. We don't really see after March as many people. So that we'd see a drop in dues, but also we would pay the Referee Society money per game. So some of the lack of playing also gets reflected in our expenses aren't going to be as high.
For sure. And Evan, how about you on the youth side of things? Obviously, we've seen the number of teams drop, I think, from a high of a few years ago. It's almost 18 to 20. I think high school teams, for varying reasons, they've dropped off in certain areas. And can you talk a bit about I know numbers across the country, I think, in certain levels of rugby are down as well. What have you seen from the youth side of things in Florida? Yeah,
I would say we stabilized at 15 for the last 3 years or so. Prior to that, we were doing really, really good, and we were on the upward trajectory. A lot of it's around burnout of coaches, resources, kids grow through, and then their parents move on, and so on. So that high school level, we see a lot of cyclical components within that. And I think the same thing looks the same at the college women's level, what Kerri was talking about. The numbers go up and down, but like you're bringing back FAU women, which I think is amazing, and getting them back on the table. UM women should be coming back this year. So we think next year we should be on a rebound stand with the college women, we hope. But in terms of the high school, it's a challenging age group. There's so many other things for them to go on. So we try to manage that as best we can. And number-wise, we're down just a little bit because we do our own registration. So in terms of the FYRU, we didn't owe USA Rugby any money. In fact, we never put ourselves in a situation where we owed them money now because we took that registration system out of theirs because we weren't like the FIU where we had significant cash flows and reserves that we could lean back on. So if we fell apart and we didn't get dues for 3 months, then we were basically having to borrow from the FIU to survive. And that's not the situation that we decided in the board that we wanted to do. So we kind of moved to our own registration system. Our numbers this year were a little down. In high school, we generally see a late uptick in kind of March and April of the kids kind of coming to the back end of the season, and we didn't get that kind of last 100 or so people. So, but for the most part, they did pretty good. The one area of strength that I feel like the Florida Rugby really, and the youth side of things, is our youth game. The youth and middle school is on a constant trajectory of growth. When I first started, I think we had less than 200 kids, registered and playing, and now we have, I think, what was my latest numbers here? I think it was like over 450 kids that play. And that's been static the last 2 years in around that component, but we're sitting really good. So we've really had some really good growth on the youth side. And I think that's the really drive. The clubs who really focus on the youth and the middle school don't have as much issues on the high school level. Sometimes they do, but most of the time we see those middle school kids being able to transition up into the high school teams and being really effective there.
No, for sure. I mean, if they start playing at middle school, there's obviously more of a chance they're going to continue to play through the high school level, and, continue to boost those numbers up. Now, I had a question that was sort of combined with another question that somebody else had. Can you talk a bit about, the successful clubs we've had, when coaches coaches disappear, whether it's because they move or, their kids stop playing? How can we sort of help these clubs, these teams, I should say, perhaps turn into clubs and continue to develop their own coaches, perhaps their kids don't play, or, all boys. We've seen a lot of teams, especially down here in the South Florida, when their kids are graduated, they stop coaching and the clubs vanish.
Right.
So, how as a union can we, and Kerri can also answer that as well, but how as a union can we help these teams, for say, sort of turn into clubs? And we look at the Okapi example, where they have a ton of coaches that obviously they're an extreme example and maybe a one-off in Florida at the moment. But how can we help these other clubs turn into an Okapi, shall we say?
I think it's the answer is simple but complicated at the same time. You're right, Kerri.
What's going on out there, Kerri?
Yeah.
A very large limb, just
Fell
like
nice.
fell
Missed
in my
you,
yard.
thankfully.
It's a sign.
I think the answer really straightforward is it's community, and it's what we call like an ecosystem or a community. Basically, clubs should be everything from an old boys team to a adult club to the high school to the middle school to a deep connection to a college team or college teams to really drive all the way everything up from middle school to high school. So I think too often, and I think this has been USA Rugby's problem in general, we silo everything. We're like, oh, well, the college game is this, the adult game is this, the youth game is this, and we try to split everything up and have everybody do that. Whilst I think that's good in terms of the management at times, there needs to be some overarching body within these clubs to kind of link them all together and help kind of create a cycle and a circle back in. So, the culture within rugby, particularly, and this is the biggest thing I've noticed different from Australia to here, is when you're done playing here, you're done with rugby. So there isn't this idea that when you're done playing, you're going to transition to become a fan or, show up to the games as old boys or, old boys, old girls, give back to the game and be a part of it, being administrators. Every single board that I've been on or been around is existing usually of players who are current players on the team. So they're not generally run by an old boy, or I use old boy in general, but old boys, old girls, they should be giving back in terms of the coaches. Quite often you'll see player coaches, quite often you'll see just the existing people doing that, and that just creates massive burnout, and then that turns back around. So you'll find that the people who want to give back to the sport, again, are often the ones when the kids are at that age, like, well, I just want to coach my son or my daughter playing, and that's really important to me at that moment. And then so again, you go through the same short-term process of when they're done at high school, then I'm just going to go watch them play college rugby and then not really be involved. So it's trying to really build that cycle. And I think Okapi saw that very early on. And the first thing they did was create an old boys team. So they created their old boys team to then turn around to then populate all their coaches at the youth level. And then they've gone through and made their men's team. Now, they're by no means perfect, and they're working really hard to become really good and to drive things forward. And they're a really good shining example, like you were talking about. And there are lots of clubs who are really trying really hard to build that multi-tier out. I think Boca does an excellent job with that. I think
that's what I was going to say, is take a look at Boca.
Boca does an exceptional job of a historically strong men's club that is now built out. I'd love to see them have a women's team. I think that's their next step. But I think within their world there, they've got FAU right around the corner, which they have direct links with. With that, they've got all the youth teams. Garth and Chris Vassell do an amazing job there of really driving that and bringing that forward there. They had a really successful year, and I think with COVID shutting down, it probably impacted them most of anybody. They were having probably the best high school season they've had in a while, and I know their youth teams are doing excellent too. So I think that's a really good example of driving things forward. I know Tampa are really trying really hard to add more layers into what they're doing, and Jacksonville have been talking to me about, well, how do they combine their men's, women's, youth, the non-contact teams and put them all underneath one banner, and how do we kind of like make that work really functionally right? And because that's the key, is that if we're all set up around a men's club, which most teams are, the whole focus is on the men's club itself and how that first team and the men's team is playing, instead of thinking about everything else that's in around it and how important the men's stuff should be just one of the small amount of things that happens instead of the many other different things that a club should be focused on and driving towards. That's my theory is creating a big community around it.
I mean, Kerri, why do you think the old boys with certain clubs, just players in general, just sort of when they stop playing, they don't get involved, whether it's by coaching or by refereeing or just by helping out financially? Why do you think it's such a problem here in Florida? Is the loss of the old boy? Certain teams do it definitely better than others, but so certain teams that there's sort of no old boy presence at all.
Can I say something? I'm sorry. I
was asking you. Yeah.
Okay, I couldn't hear anything for the last minute, so I'm having
I was just saying.
Day.
Yeah. Why do you think these players, people, when they stop playing, they just sort of vanish off the face of the earth and don't continue to give back to the game? And how can we help that?
I think some of it. I think it really is. I don't want to like blame Florida, but if I think I look at Gainesville and I think about the number of old boys we have in town, I would say it's picked up maybe over this last year with a couple people moving back. But I would say, there's probably about like 7 total in town that formerly played for Gainesville. So I think, and I don't know what it's like over in Daytona, but I would think Daytona might have a similar type of demographic where they have players, they have them for a while. I don't think that they have a ton of people that are staying around because I don't think it's as stable of a community. So I think that in some of the areas we see that. Also, too, I think it's important to really value the old boys, and
yes, definitely.
I don't think some clubs do a very good job of it. I will give an example because I said I was going to keep it real. So Gainesville for I'm going to complain about a shirt color right now, but Gainesville for 17 years wore a red shirt. And so this was something that was like, you could not get a red shirt unless you were a player. Like that was our player's color. And this year we were told that, I would say the older people, that people needed a new color t-shirt and that the red was no-go. Things were changing. And a couple people were like, listen, like the red shirt's kind of important to us. Someone said, I'll even give you the money you'd make on your red shirt just don't. We've had that, and then so that's an example of a shirt. But I also think it's valuing some of the things that people have done and just listening to them, even if you don't agree with them. So just let them have a voice. So some clubs do a great job of it, but not all.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let's talk about the current situation here. Obviously, we're not playing rugby at the moment. When do you both think we may be playing rugby again in Florida? I know it's just your general opinion from what you've seen. I think how things have developed, especially in Florida over the last couple of weeks.
I mean, honestly, if you had asked me 2 weeks ago, I would have said the fall. Right? We've been talking. We have everybody kind of working with Evan and kind of creating some, I want to say, shadow schedules where we're like, okay, well, if we find out this is on, like, let's make it happen. We're ready. We've been talking about having our annual meeting as an event and bringing back All Florida Day. And now I'm uncertain, particularly with the numbers over the last 5 days.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously, contact sports where, you're involving 30 plus people in contact are probably going to be the last thing to get approved. And over the last few days, especially down here in South Florida, we've seen the numbers, spike again. And you can read into those what you want, but the people that make the decisions are going to see those numbers and perhaps push everything back even as far as the spring. I
know, and it's unfortunate because I really do think that being outside and not being in direct contact with, I know it's a contact sport, but, I have to really be breathing in your face for a number of minutes and be, in order to get you sick, and no one's going to, it doesn't work like that. But, I mean, it's unfortunate, but I did see a lot of people sad about, getting rid of scrums, right? Like that would be awful for some of us, particularly a former hooker.
Right.
But I think that people would be willing to play under alternate rules if they were able to just get out there and do something. Because I almost think, I think that the counties, I'm going based upon Alachua County, which is kind of a conservative in terms of their health restrictions. I don't think that they see a huge difference between, say, touch rugby and tackle rugby. They're like, hey, touch rugby, you still touch someone, and tackle rugby, so I don't think that they see a huge difference. So I think like once one opens up, maybe we'll see the other one. I don't know if Evan thinks it'll be different for the youth. I mean, because they're opening up summer camps.
Yeah, I would imagine the social distancing is the difficult thing that we're going to have to work around. And I have a feeling that it's going to be county by county, which is unfortunate. And I think the counties that are going to be last are the tri-counties down in South Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
which is where the
teams are. Yeah,
the vast bulk of a big chunk of the teams are that we have. But I do hopeful that we'll have something in the fall. I don't feel confident that any college rugby will happen in the fall. I think the schools will be very conservative. That's my gut right now. I think in terms of the youth kids, they might just roll the dice, and if the counties allow it and the teams want to do it, then we have to allow that as long as we're following the return to play protocols. I would rather be more conservative with it, and I wouldn't want us to be one of those organizations that's really trying to drive this forward, but we also want to support the clubs that want to do it. So I know Cappy's rolling out a youth camp, but it's non-contact and social distancing. They just want to get the kids active in doing that. And I think that's an important role that we play within this too, is that the kids have to be active and they have to do things. So yeah, it definitely, it'll be an interesting few months here as we try to work this out. I hope the spikes go down, but if they continue like this, I don't see us rolling back out anytime soon anyway.
Yeah, no doubt. Some of these kids have been stuck at home here for 2 months now plus, and getting them outside, even throwing a ball around to somebody 6 feet away from them would be a positive. There's no doubt about it. Yeah. Let's talk about. I'm going to skip USA Rugby situation for now because I know it's such an influx thing.
Good.
I know. Yeah. I mean, all we can say is that Florida, I think, is, as far as I know, is looking to continue to move on with USA Rugby in whatever form they end up finding themselves in. So there's obviously still so many things up in the. I know some of the college teams have decided to sort of break away. And the women's college, I think D2 have decided to go and sort of go else on their own here off into a different union. But I think do we have any update on that, on the whole situation, or is it still just so, just so in flux at the moment?
I think all of our teams were now committed as of last week. I think the final one was the colleges were. I would say the college men are the last one really to fully commit, but they're committed to being with each other and playing spring rugby. So I think it's good. The split you're talking about is more based around fall and spring. So most of the East Coast fall teams that play fall championships have moved off to NCR, and that's kind of being renegotiated right now with what relationship they'll have with USA Rugby. They started off pretty tense towards them. From the latest things that I was told in the conference call yesterday, and I have another one tonight, is that they're building a relationship and they're trying to work out what that looks like. But all of our teams in Florida, so college-wise, D1 women have all gone to D1, and D2 women have gone to what's called the CRAA, which is the housing company that D1A men's rugby sits under. So it creates them a lot of really cool opportunities, and FTV are getting on board and they want to start promoting women's rugby specifically. And I think our teams have a really good opportunity to promote themselves through that. So we're working slowly in the background on that with them. College men, they're kind of pushing. We're just wait and see. That's the best thing that we can see is what everything looks like. But we're definitely aligned with all the other D1 AA teams who all want to be aligned with USA Rugby. Kerri will say all the senior men and women are all aligned. The GUs are all aligned together, and they're staying involved with USA Rugby. And the youth, we are all aligned with an organization called USA Youth Rugby, which has popped out, but they're also directly aligned with USA Rugby. So I think most of our teams, in fact, all of them, bar maybe the small school men's teams, will probably stay who they were Ainsborough before, will probably go NCR, but we'll work with them as they go. And I would say probably the primary reason why I feel like we want to stay with USA Rugby is that we are, the best analogy that I've heard is that we are all as members, USA Rugby, as rugby playing clubs and players and all that, we are USA Rugby. Even though they mismanaged, and none of us like what they did with a lot of that. But it's our responsibility to put it back together, which is why I think Kerri and I have spent a lot of time and many hours sitting on conference calls and working through and trying to help people deal with this, because we do feel like it's very important that our members have the opportunity to be a part of USA Rugby and be part of that, but under the right spectrum and the right way of doing it. And I think particularly on the senior club level, they've done a really good job of managing that. They do talk a lot on their calls, right, Kerri? So that's why I was...
I'll just say briefly, I have calls for the USA restructuring with the other senior, the presidents of the other senior GUs. Right. And those calls are probably about 2 to 3 hours a week. It's been really good because I've just helped organize the elections. We have an executive committee. Now we're opening up nominations for committee chairs. I'm about to send that out. So if people are interested in working on a USA Rugby committee, now is the time to get involved. Put your money where your mouth is. I might say that. And so this is how we get board members. You don't like it? Come join us. And so, but I think that the group at the working group for the senior rugby is really interested in making things work, but a higher level of accountability. Like, don't go and overspend our money.
Sure.
We're going to be making sure, the things that I think the senior unions were unhappy with before, those things are being discussed very, lots of detail. So it's good.
No, good to you. I mean, I think hopefully we get something good out of this whole mess, obviously, whether it's USA Rugby or the COVID. But, I think in Florida, America in general, I think I've always been upset that we're so obsessed with national championships, especially at the 15s level, where it's really financially, a big burden from college to even to the senior club teams, those that work. And I think one good thing about this is that we'll maybe come out and focus a little bit more on perhaps the representative sides, being able to travel as a state team when there's a little more money, perhaps make the Florida Championship, worth a little more. Not that it was not worth anything before, but now, Florida Championship maybe is as far as you can go. Whether they do have bowl games for the college sides will have to be seen. But I think in the grand scheme of things, it'll be good for Florida Rugby in the end.
I think it would be good. And I know some people don't totally agree with this. I think it would be good that if you won Florida and you were like, I'm done. I'm game. I think that's great. I know it was a big deal a few years ago about one of our teams not moving on, and it was a difficult situation because we were required to send someone on. The championships were set up to be 4 teams, but I really think of a team as like, we don't want to go here and we don't want to go there because we don't think that we're going to win nationals, and we're really happy with this win, and let's just call it a day. I wish there was an option for that to be enough for our clubs, because I think that is, they've had 8 to 10 games leading up to that win. And then, you drag a whole bunch of people. I don't know. I mean, I've made those trips and they're meaningful. We've had teams do really well, but I think a club should be able to have that option. And right now we've had to go through a lot of things in our bylaws to be like, now this is playing towards a national championship. If you win, you got to go. And, we might see some things. I mean, I asked about an invitational tournament, but some people are concerned, particularly for the South region, that some of our teams that don't really travel very often might get overlooked. So if our teams aren't, on the radar, they might not make those invitationals. Now, I don't really buy in to that, but so we'll see with national championships. There's going to be a competitions committee, and that's something that they will evaluate. I think there will still be national championships, though. Yeah,
I think as an invitational thing, if you have a 15s team that won the Florida State title and you have a good budget and want to go travel to a potential national championship summit, again, it's much harder. That's why I love it for 7s. You can get that done over a weekend. But for 15s, it requires a lot of travel, especially as far as we are. The Miami teams obviously got to travel 5+ hours just to get out of the state. But if we have something perhaps within the South that we can end up doing, and that I think for many teams, that would be enough. All right, we're 45 minutes in here. I know Evan's got to be somewhere at 9, so let's get cracking here with some of the other stuff. We just had a question from Cortland, which I'm going to jump around a bit. Cortland's question was, do you guys have a union plan to push more Florida college players to go and try out for MLR or set a goal to apply for the draft next year? Now, I had a question. I know I mentioned to you guys, obviously, it's public knowledge that Miami is looking to get into the MLR game come 2022. Have you guys been approached, and how do you think that would benefit the union? We can talk about Cortland and potentially getting Florida college players more opportunities. I know last year, obviously, they went and had a nice sort of FCC All-Star trip to Red River and ended up beating them. And I know we've obviously had a number of Florida college players been looked at and have gone to the MLR, whether through college or not. How do you look at the whole MLR situation, and what's the situation with the union relationship with them and perhaps the academy side of things?
Do you want me to answer that, Kerri, or do you want it?
I'll start and then I'll let you go.
Okay.
I would say that there have been 2 opportunities already with Rugby ATL coming down and providing training camps in Tampa. And so that has been an opportunity that they have set up. That was like Rugby Atlanta. So players that were interested in doing that have had a local opportunity. I mean, we don't take any responsibility for that, but I will say that that has been, an option. Evan, I know that you had a response by email for someone that I think addressed this, so maybe you could go next.
Yeah, so I think your questions, they're all kind of interlinked, even with Cortland's one there. So Rugby ATL are already here doing stuff. They have their academy functioning. They usually run it out of Tampa. So that's where Austin, who's the coach who's leading that, is kind of driving that forward. They're also very interested in pushing youth rugby, and I would say that's been the same conversations that I have had with the Miami group and what they're wanting to do. The Miami group is really adamant on trying to build that off the back of Florida players. Without giving too much away, they've asked to be very private within this, because there's obviously a lot still to go, but there's a lot of planning. There's a lot of things still before they can roll anything out, but they've had the initial conversations around it, and they're really interested in the youth. And when I talk about youth, I'm talking about the middle school and the young ones, and trying to drive that through and then kind of create academies through that, so then they can create a pipeline of kids coming through. Charlie mentioned earlier that he didn't know any of the players on there who were drafted in the MLR last night. But we had John Powers, who was a 4-year player for Western High School, and he got a scholarship up in a school in the Northeast, and now he's going in, I think 7th in the draft. So that was it's neat to see those kids. And we had a couple other kids who played high school rugby in Florida are already in the MLR. So we have the pipeline there. A lot of the kids who are the best players, because college rugby isn't a scholarship sport here in Florida, tend to go off to the bigger time rugby programs within that. And I think that's part of, if we can get MLR here in Florida, I think that can really help us drive that credibility back to the schools and that kind of pipeline to that. So that's one of the things that Kirk Swanner, who really pushes all. He's the commissioner for the men's conference, and is really trying to drive the kids and the coaches to try to get behind the FCC All-Star program. Last year, we went to New Orleans and played before them, kind of got scouted. There were a few kids out of that got taken from that and went up to the Atlanta team and played in that kind of development 404 team. So we kind of see a pathway there. I'm not sure that the draft is something that our kids would be, at the moment, be always successful unless they're a really standout player, like I'd say like Kyle Lazera from USF. But I know Kyle is heading to England. But a lot of those, those players, we have to play at a higher level than Florida first before we can really take them with credibility at that next level. And I think that's the big step for the colleges, is that we need to raise that standard of play, so then we can do that. And I think that kind of will have a flow-on effect to men's rugby, which then hopefully can really create that pathway into in the MLR if and when that happens.
Yeah, I mean, you'd love to see a relationship similar to what Life has, with Rugby ATL, and Life's had a great connection with Florida players. Over the last 10 years, we obviously spoke to Cam Dolan and obviously Alex Tucci, who took 2 very different paths to MLR. And I think players need to realize that there's not just one way to get to pro rugby. There's many different ways, but attending those camps that the Rugby ATL had down here last year, and again, the representative side stuff is definitely the way to go forward if you want to be seen by MLR side, because they can come watch one game and see who in many people's opinions are the best players in those conferences, and it saves them having to travel to a million games in Florida. So yeah, I think there's definitely many positive things about the potential of MLR coming to Florida. Absolutely, and just the development alone and the awareness of it that it will create within the community, I think is excellent. So it's exciting. Hopefully we can all come through, and obviously things are at the beginning planning of that, and there's a million different ways that things can turn of this component. Oh yes. We've seen with the
be good. I think it'll be good, particularly like in the Miami area, but just overall, anytime that there is more opportunities to see rugby. I have a friend that lives in DC who's involved with youth rugby there, and I had plans to. I said I want to go see the Beast play. This is before Beast hurt his back playing because our scrimmaging is so bad. Okay, so I said I just want to come and see the Beast play, and I said, oh, is this it? Is this what's filling the stands, right? It's people like me that want to go see like that awesome person, so they don't have to go to New Zealand. And they said that they're actually filling the stands a lot with people from the community. They're trying to and so if we get more people from the community, it's free advertising. People are like, oh, what's this rugby thing? You know, your stories when people are like, we didn't know there was rugby, and I was like, oh God, every time. So yeah. And I do see something in the comment, and I want to make sure is this the person that you said, Evan, this from Daytona U19 was drafted by Rugby ATL, John?
Oh, no, different player. I think that's one thing we need to get a little better on is sort of tracking these guys.
Agreed.
You know, I know as much as I do just from, you know, being a part of the media and knowing the names, but these two, even from yesterday, I didn't know they were Florida products. I think, you know, as a union and as fans of Florida Rugby, can do a better job of saying, you know, these two guys got drafted last night. We only had 24 picks, and two of them came from Florida products.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Don, for pointing that out.
Yeah, thanks, Don. I think Charlie, I'm going to post that one as well. Yeah, John Scotty, who's also played, I think, up at Arkansas State, I know, with Brock Roper. So it's great to see him. There's a lot of Florida products going out of state listen, it's a shame that we can't keep them in Florida to play, but it's great that they want to go play at as high level rugby as they can. I'm going to get to a frustration. I know we've got some questions from people around. If you have more questions for us, please drop them in here on Facebook or on YouTube. But let's get to some frustrations that I know I have, and perhaps some of the general public. Well, let's ask you what's your most, other than we talked about the lack of perhaps old boy support at certain clubs. What else frustrates you about Florida Rugby, the two of you, that you think could be better?
You want to go, Kerri?
Yeah.
Go, Kerri. Ladies first.
I'm like looking around for the lady. Okay, so I think for me, we hear a lot of, when we get complaints, and Jessie, who's on our board, she was, Jessie, I'm going to call you out for being a complainer. Jessie was like, why is the schedule not up here? And why can I not get this information? I was like, come be like a college director. And then Rick, who's our secretary, he wanted more information to go out, and we were like, hey, who does this? Who does the information? It's the secretary. Yeah. Come on out. And I don't expect that level of commitment from everybody. But I think people will complain, but then not want to do anything about it, or they might not understand that it's our role to do what's best for like Florida as a state. So while it sucks for your club, but you're not thinking about anybody else but you. And so while we can take that complaint and try to like process it and try to make you understand, the decisions we're making are really what we're trying to do for the greater good. And if people would, bring that to us, then we could kind of show them the other side. But, when the level of complaining is just a one-off Facebook comment, I'm like, come to a meeting, like, let's talk about it. You want to know what's going on? Like, that, if you can feel my frustration, it's that level of noise without a lot of follow-up. And then I'm going to just keep going. And then the other thing is that this is related to the referees. So I don't know if we're going to get to talk about it completely, but I would say almost the same thing goes for when people complain about our referees, but they're not referees. They've never taken the referee course.
No doubt.
To show up.
I'm going to support you on that.
Who wants to show up at your game to have a bunch of people that don't even know what they're yelling? Like, they're not even positioned to see a forward pass, and we're going to have that person yelling and berating someone that's like making the game happen. Sometimes these people drive 2 hours there, 2 hours back for your game. So it's less than $20, and they're like, they get $80 a game. Yeah, they were there an hour before. It's a half-hour paperwork. They drove there. And so who wants to do it? And so we got, I don't know if we're going to get to the referee situation, but people will be like, well, hey, the referees aren't keeping up. I've actually heard, and I won't say from who, from certain referees that like it's a lot easier to call a higher level game. It's faster, but it's cleaner. And there's, they don't want to do 19 scrums. So, I mean, they're not turning around and being like, why don't you get better at rugby? Like, why don't you get in shape? Why don't you break down so you're not offsides? And so that for me is the like, lot of talk, man. A lot of talk with not a lot of doing anything about it. So.
No, I think you're turning a negative into a positive. I mean, I'm sure I can talk for Charlie in that this whole sort of video podcast thing came about, which is because we figured people didn't know enough about Florida rugby and the people involved and where these players have gone and, obviously won national championships. And we said, we both got a little more free time in our hands now. Why don't we do something positive and turn it into this? And hopefully people do the same thing when it comes to refereeing or, as you said, getting involved and doing something, whether it's how I don't see enough updates on Facebook. I have some free time. Can I help update things on the Facebook? Like with those, with the 2 kids that got drafted yesterday, I should know better. I should have known those 2 kids, but it also should have been perhaps a high school coach saying, there's a potential for this kid, Scotty, to get drafted tomorrow. He went and played rugby and he was the Daytona product. Can we get something up saying these are the kids that could potentially get drafted tomorrow? But it has to start with the coaches reaching out to the likes of you and Evan and Rick, and looking to help promote that stuff. I mean, Evan, what do you see from the youth side as perhaps your most frustrating thing with Florida rugby?
I would say there's a couple of things, but it's very much down the lines of where Kerri was heading there. I often find the loudest voices are often the quickest ones to be negative with their voice. So, and I think that stems from the sideline to the way that they talk about the referee to the way that they communicate with us in the FRU, the way they communicate on social media about rugby and just different things related to it. We're not expecting everybody to be singing our praises or anything along those lines. It's just, I think it's quite often the only comments that we see or we get directed to are very much on the negative side of things. And I think that sometimes can get really frustrating to deal with because we do work really hard to try to make things happen. And you guys understand that, like, is that we really want to push that forward. And that sometimes we forget that the people who are really trying to drive the game on the ground, who are really doing really positive jobs, we don't do enough of a good enough job, which I really like the idea of what your podcast is doing, is really highlighting what they're doing and why they're doing it. Why our focus should be, and this has been my biggest frustration with dealing with USA Rugby at the moment, is there's too many people worried about too many small things at the national level instead of, if you just focus and got your home office right and you got your local area right and really trying to drive that and make that strong, we'd be in a lot better position nationally within that, because we wouldn't have to worry about what are we going to get from them? What are they giving us? It should be, what are we doing and how are we doing? How can we just be strong? And we want to be an active part of what's going on. So it's that mindset to me that can get frustrating at times. It is frustrating to see the high school teams go up and down. I would say, and then probably the other biggest frustration is the fact that we can't seem to get high school girls rugby going really strong. We have incredible athletes here, and when you see the kids that play in college, the girls teams that play in college, and the athletes that come out of that tells you that they're there in Florida and the girls level. And we haven't tapped that, and we haven't even really looked at how to do that. And that's a really big frustrating and a weak point for us as the union. But we can't solve. That's a really difficult puzzle to solve, because we have to have people willing on the ground to step in and really take that on and run with it and really drive that forward. Yeah,
that's all it is. I mean, we were talking to Alex Tucci, and his former coach Ernie and his wife Andrea obviously also played as well. And they were talking about getting, now they've had a child, he's getting a little older, Pat's getting back into coaching rugby. And that's what it takes, on the ground. And as you said, with the girls and the success that we've had individually, outside of, as well as obviously UCF have had a great college program over the last few years. And Charlie and I were sort of going through the list of people that we wanted to talk to for this podcast. And it was amazing, the list of women that we came up with that have gone on to play for USA, represented rugby, and as well as solid college programs. Even recently with the Wantlins and people like that, where we're producing the girls rugby players, but they're not having teams to play for. So it's got to start with the coaches and being able to come in. And I think you guys have done a reasonable job of supporting the girls coaches that have come out and wanting to help, but it's got to take a little more than that. We've only had, spotty stuff here down in South Florida and spotty stuff, up in Sebastian perhaps, and nowhere else that I can think of. I mean, staying up with the sort of the frustrations as a union as a whole, where do you think we could do better, Kerri, just as a board for the union, and just as but perhaps just focus on the board and you obviously, you've been here long enough now that you've seen mistakes perhaps made on the union side. But where do you think the union can get better?
So I think, we've already touched on it a little bit here, is in terms of communication. So we had tried to hire someone to do some social media for us so that we could get more information out. It turns out that person didn't work out. The other two people were wanting more money than we were comfortable spending.
Right.
And so I would say that if someone's listening to this and is interested, please get in touch with us. We're not going to pay you $50 an hour. I'm just going to say it now. Like, we don't have that money. I love
Right.
it, hey, if we could raise dues by the cost of one more Starbucks, you could have better social media. But if you want to keep paying dues at the level you're doing, then we're gonna, that's what people were asking us for, and we're not comfortable doing it. I think, Evan and Rick have been working together, and we had the rest of the board is we're trying to do more, but I think that there's a limit to. I would say making infographics is not really Evan's thing. I like infographics, so occasionally I'll make one. I'm there's a referee shortage. That stuff hit the wall, man. That's the most we've ever seen besides the women's club. So I'd say that's one thing, is just kind of communicating highlights. I think so. That's, I would say, probably our biggest weakness. And then I would also, some of it has to do with the way our meetings are structured or whatever, but I think understanding the expectations that we have as a board as the services we're going to provide. And then, what we as a board expect from Evan and what he does for us. And then some people will show up, Matt was the greatest at this. I'm kind of mad that Matt's not going to be at the summer meetings, but he'd be like, that's not our job to do that for you. That's your job as a club to do that for yourself. And so if you want that level of service, then, so I think kind of balancing, Di Morgan, one of his favorite quotes was unmet expectations. It's something basically unfulfilled don't have expectations, because that's what leads to disappointment. And I'm not saying to not have expectations from the union, but I think we really need to have better communication with people with what we think we're going to do for you.
For sure. And Evan, how about on the youth side of things? Obviously we've had all-star success, especially through USA South, and our traveling representative sides have been great. But how can we get those numbers up? In these clubs, where can the FRU do a little better on the youth side of things, perhaps?
I think it's value is a word that I like to use, is kind of generating better value for them, and being able to cater to the different levels that we have. So making sure that, that our larger teams are getting what they need, and they don't feel like the smaller teams are getting trodden on and so on. So it's kind of balancing that out from the youth scene. Right. So then we can balance out the development of it. We try a lot of different things because we haven't solved the puzzle yet. Because I wouldn't say last year's season was, particularly at the high school level, was what we wanted to see. Very similar to what we probably see in men's rugby a little bit is we have an imbalance. There's more teams in the South than we do in the North, so travel becomes an issue, and sometimes we over-manage travel and we over-expect travel instead of really just saying the kids just want to go and play rugby, and let's try to do what we can to do that. So yeah, I would say that's the biggest thing. I think I would rather see some more regional pockets pop up. I'd love to see the Bay Area really take off and have a lot of youth rugby, so then they can just have youth rugby there. Same thing in Central Florida. I think they're lagging a long way behind on youth rugby. I think the South is doing a really good job of doing that, and I'll give the South youth teams particularly a real promise. They've tried really hard this year in particular to try to support the teams that are geographically isolated. It's never perfect, and we never get it exactly right. But I think that's the biggest area of things that we're trying to get, is provide enough value for the kids so they have enough rugby to play, but not give too much to where we're burning them and the coaches out and taking away from what it is. So it's just finding that right balance within that. And I think that's our biggest work on in the next little bit of time. Obviously the girls is, as I mentioned before, is one of the biggest areas of potential, I think. And I think the goals, to me, is what Florida is in general. Is we have this massive state with a massive population, but we should be like California, but we're not. And and I think Texas is our biggest example of a state that's probably 3 or 4 years ahead of us, and they do a really good job with a number of things. So we try to leverage back on them, and I look at them at both youth and the adult rugby to try to see what we can borrow from them. Probably adult rugby, the best thing we borrowed, I think, was D4. Kerri brought that to me, and I think that's
I think that worked well this year.
Yeah, it's definitely got improvements to go, but I think it provides that social, but it still gives everybody opportunities there. I'm hoping to try to grow that out too. And so kind of looking at those type models, looking what they do at the high school level, because we're now aligned with them, so which helps with the high school level. So they have the same seasonality as us. They have all the same travel issues. East to west for them is huge, just like us from north to south. So it's just trying to manage a lot of those things is very difficult.
Gotcha. Well, let's stick with you. We've got a couple of questions here. I had a question from an anonymous source who will remain nameless in regards to the high school side of things. They're talking about a lot of poaching of players, especially from power-hungry youth clubs that are destroying other clubs. Are there any plans in place to prevent these clubs from continuing to do this? It seems that it's the same clubs that are continuing. I don't have names of clubs, but I'm sure you perhaps know off the top of your head. And you obviously don't need to name any clubs, but is this a real issue? I know we've seen teams disappear for varying reasons, and
there's definite issues. I would like to hope. I always assume the best of people. I would like to hope the coaches are not actively going there and trying to poach a player from another team. I think what happens often is kids see this team or this club do this, or a parent sees that and they want to have their kid involved in that, and then that gets perceived as poaching.
The product of a successful club, sometimes.
Yeah, so I do think there is this balance that we've got to tread. I'm not into making sure that we create boundaries in areas. I don't think we're big enough to where we can do that. If you live in this area, you must go and play for this team. I think we can't restrict people within that. I do think that we can tighten up some components around eligibility, and once you kind of play for one club, that we have a better conversation. We've had that kind of worked out a little bit at the AGMs, and the coaches have done a really good job of owning up to that and having that discussion with teams. I do think it's high school sports and youth sports, and I think parents, coaches, everybody else gets over invested, and the kids just want to play, and wherever the best position spot for them to play just needs to just happen. And so there's a lot of that, but yeah, we've tried really hard the last couple of years. There was a couple of years ago where there was some pretty I wouldn't say serious instances, but the coaches were very aggressive towards each other, so we had to really manage that, and that was quite a challenge. That required me to drive to South Florida and sit in a meeting between two clubs, which you can imagine that's a lot of fun. But they're the parts of the role that you have to do, and to make sure, because everybody. The great thing about it is that you're getting a comment like that. That means they care. Right. That means that they're vested enough to write you a comment and that they want to do that. And I think that needs to get validated to some extent. But we also can't over-regulate what we're doing. We can't sit here and create these rules that are very difficult for us to manage and to work around. And I think at times we make a rule based on one thing that happened, and then we don't realize the unintended consequences that come from that. So we've got to be really cautious when creating rules and regulations around that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it happens at youth sports at every level, whether it's football or soccer, or when we've seen the travel baseball situation, and it's really come to light over the last 5 years, where it's just getting absolutely insane. Where players are getting paid to travel across the country for one team rather than others. So hopefully, it never gets to that stage. But I know, I think the referees also need to do a good job of. I think they did a little better job this past year of, controlling the sidelines and keeping the negativity from certain teams away from the pitch.
And I think to that, when we actually started instigating that rule around spectators being on one side and the coaches and the players being on the other, that really took the heat out of the sideline. And I got a lot of heat at that. And I know there were a number of referees that were they don't want to have to do that. But then when they started to see it and it changes, and not every club is great with it, but for the most of the time when you instigate that, I think it really does take the heat out of the sideline, because it just stops riling up. It's usually the kids, the kids who are in the coach's box with them being riled up by the sideline, and they just tend to make more noise. And then now that just translates into more and more heat into the game. So if we take the spectators to the other side and let them have some fun and have that spectator environment, I think it definitely helps.
No, I think that's a very simple thing, and it's been a part of youth soccer. I know I refereed youth soccer a few years ago, and that was every match you went to. The fans were on one side. Even my little U11 rec team that I coached, the fans on one side and coaches on the other. All right, Kerri, let's get to one more question. See if we have time for a couple more after this. But this is from some bloke named John Devonport. Never heard of him. But are there any plans for improving coaches across the state? I know, obviously, just assuming the USA Rugby, we have obviously had coaching clinics from USA Rugby happen over the years, and obviously we're in a bit of state of flux with that at the moment. Are there any plans, going ahead if we don't get that assistance? Is that something that USA Rugby perhaps doesn't want to fund anymore, of doing it as a state?
Yeah, so I have I'll try to be brief. We've got like 3 things to say on it. One is, yes, so we've partnered with Ignite Rugby, and we're offering an online coaching forum. And so we've started to pilot that program. We're still working out some of the kinks. We're going to have another conference call this Thursday. We're giving them feedback on what we like about the online platform, and then the things they don't like, and they're trying to customize it for us. And so they're actually going to, in addition to that, provide us some online webinars, similar to what Haigh's doing for referee development, where it's like,
yeah, that's been great.
Yeah, so they're going to offer some continuing education that's, I think is going to add value to that. And the second thing is that we're in discussion with at least one other, not a professional coaching program, but with I would say a team overseas to provide us with some coaching opportunities, so they would come here and be able to do some coaching clinics for us, some in-person ones. So that would be good. And that's something that we've, I would say, is something that I've hung my hat on, because I think that will, I've been pushing, I wanted more money for the coaching development. I've always wanted more money because I think that has the greatest impact on our players. So if you have good coaches, and then the players see value in training, and it's just good for rugby all around. People aren't going to stay if your coaching is not good. And that would be my third point, is that we really need the coaches to recognize that regardless of who they are, they don't know it all, and there's always opportunities to grow as a person. And I'm going to use Chris. Chris from West Palm is probably like one of our best coaches. I've lost to him several times, and it's awful. But it's really bad, and he's great. I mean, and I lose to him, and I will turn around and say he's fantastic. And it's because he's not done. He's always like, what's the newest law? How can my players stay up with the law? How can I use this? I mean, he's just on top of it. And some of that is because he has more time on his hands, but some of it is coming from a growth mindset. And I don't know Chris well enough to say Chris has a growth mindset and these other people don't. But I would say other people, when we provide coaching opportunities and they don't participate, because they've been coaching a certain way since 1994, and that was good enough. It's not. And
go ahead. Yeah.
That's it. I mean, even Raul, right? Like Raul from UCF, when we had the people that worked for Ignite, when Ignite came in and did a weekend program, it wasn't Ignite, but whatever, same kind of people. Came in, Raul went, and Raul's one of our best winningest coaches in the state. At both the women's and college women's level. And so we need to grow the coaches, but only so much as they're willing to come to the table and do the coaching. So they got to put in the work.
No, I mean, it's definitely the same on the referee side. I think that's one great thing that's come out of this whole COVID thing, is the Zoom meetings and being able to get referees together on a conference call, even especially those that, perhaps think they know better, that have refereed for 15, 20 years. And I've come to listen to what Haigh has to say, and then what our individual groups have to say, and been watching videos presented by Richard Every, and just trying to get better. And I think it benefits on the coaches on the coaching side as well. So I know you mentioned, I was reading the minutes of your meeting from last week, and there was a mention of there was a mention of a certain Premiership side that a certain John Devonport also used to play for. So I'm going to assume that's where the coaching relationship may be happening. So that's awesome. So be sure to check out the minutes. I know Rick sends those out, whoever it does sends those out to everybody, I think, in the States. So make sure you read those minutes from the meetings, because they do contain some very valuable information. So let's finish on a positive note. Evan, give me something positive about Florida Rugby that you'd like to let those watching know about.
I think we have this opportunity bounce back from this really strong and fast. It was really neat to see ESPN pick up Super Rugby last night. You know, as a Southern Hemisphere guy, to be able to watch that live on television on Saturday night.
Yeah, for
and
sure.
I think we have an opportunity when people want to get back into this. Everybody's rested. They're not worn out. They're not burnt out, hopefully. And they'll be ready to go and take this on, you know. So for me, like, my positive was that I feel like when we get going, we're going to go 100 miles an hour. And I feel like rugby is really going to take off when we have this opportunities there to do that. So I think that's the big positive. I think if people can change their mindset and think about more than just, you know, winning that 1 year, I think that would be really beneficial, and we can really take advantage of these opportunities and the development. Yeah, I'll give a plug to the college men's programs have probably done the best in this break. They have weekly conference calls where all the coaches all get together and they're doing coach development, player admin, you know, development. They've been doing a lot of really strong work around this. And I think that's only the way that these teams come together, and the way that they're bound together as a group of 8 is really neat to see them drive that forward. So that's really cool to see and to be a part of that. And that's really on the coaches loosening up their grips and, you know, their egos and everything else that we all have associated with coaching and wanting to win and just wanting to share our ideas. And I'm looking forward to seeing more of that happen too.
Awesome. Thanks, Evan. Kerri, how about something positive to finish us off on here before Evan's got to run to, I'm sure, his 15th Zoom meeting of the week?
I was going to say, one of the things that the shutdown has really enabled us to do is, besides having a rest, it's really seen the opportunity for using online platforms constructively. So your show is a perfect example of getting people together where, you know, this isn't something you did maybe because you had no time. You probably had no time. You're doing all these other things.
Pretty much.
Right. So that's one issue. But, you know, we found out that Empire does these town hall meetings. And so, you know, I'm always like, come to the AGM, come to the AGM. Then someone comes to the AGM. I'm like, oh God, do we have to talk about this for an hour? And so Empire does regular town halls. We normally have these conference calls at least before the men's season. And I know that the length of the men's season, you know, it just goes back and forth. And so we're like, on the conference call? Were you on the call? Because that's what your club decided. But you know, I think we have a lot of opportunity to get more information out constructively using online platforms. We haven't been taking advantage of it. And I think that some of us, you know, I'm old. And so I was a little worried, like, oh, too many people are going to be chiming in and we're not going to be able to do the AGM. Like, I still want the AGM to be an in-person thing, but we want people to participate. And so we're not afraid of questions. And so I think it would be really good to like implement town halls. I think coaches are now like, oh, well, everybody won't come to the pub after and watch this video with us. Well, why don't you do it one of the off nights? Why don't you do your skill session on Zoom? Everybody can watch the video from home. They got their shower, they're fed, they're happy. And I think I think we're living in a box.
No, for sure. Now, talking about the AGM, usually I think we have it in September or so. Is there still plans to have that as part of the summit if obviously guidelines allow us to? So give us a little bit, perhaps a little more information on how that sort of whole process is proceeding for this year's AGM.
So we're making plans for September 11th and 12th weekends. We are trying to figure out 12th and 13th. I'm looking at last year's. But we're trying to, one of the things that we do, you know, Evan said he had to sit down and put two people across from each other and make them talk. And one of the values of these meetings is that people can go and talk. We want to have some coaching development opportunities. Same for referee development opportunities. We really want it to be a community event because I think, you know, we can all like say our little off comments. I do it, but then when you sit down and the other person's a human, it's really important. It helps us grow rugby and build relationships. And so the plan is to have those components. We wanted to do a few other things, but because of the coronavirus, I don't think we're going to add them in. We're working with the Referee Society to negotiate the contract, and Ian, our local sales, our vice president, who also does sales, we're like, you go. Because Evan and I are asking for money. So, Ian, that's your job. So
Ian Henry's he likes to talk. Every time I go to their games in Dyer Park, you can't get him to shut up. But it's always positive stuff about rugby and about Palm Beach and how things are going over there. So awesome. Well, guys, go ahead, Evan.
I was going to say he would just run the Zoom call if you'd allow him on here. So
Charlie and I did talk about having a special guest. Maybe we should have had Ian on, but we would have gone until about 10 p.m. I think. But maybe we'll have him on another time. Evan and Kerri, I appreciate you taking your time. I know we've kept you here for an hour and 20 minutes or so on your Sunday evenings, but we really appreciate it. And I hope those that are checking us out on Facebook and YouTube are as well. No episode next week. It's Father's Day next weekend, so be sure to take time and spend it with your dad, even though I think I'm quarantined from my dad because I got on a plane yesterday. So I think I'm just going to have to Zoom with him on Father's Day because I'm banned from seeing him for 2 weeks from yesterday. But we'll get over that. Maybe we'll have a beer on the other side of the dining room table. But we'll be back with you the following week. We're not sure who we're going to have on yet, but Charlie and I. Charlie, always my producer behind the scenes, making things work. Thank you, Charlie, as always, even with that ugly jersey you're wearing. I have my cup to balance things out. Obviously, I will remind Charlie that FAU beat FIU in rugby and football last season. And that's all that really matters in the end of things. But
I got a lot of videos.
Awesome.
I just want to say one thing that I have and everybody has learned, that there's so much work you guys do.
Yes.
Evan gets paid, but you don't, Kerri. And it's a lot of things. It's a lot of things, and I want to thank you, and I hope everybody sees that you guys work really hard and a lot of things, all kinds of things. You have to be involved. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and as they said, if you feel like you can help and get out and get involved in any way with Florida Rugby, whether it's, as Kerri said, being part of perhaps of a USA Rugby committee, which would be an awesome experience for some of you out there that want to get involved on the national side of things, or whether it's with Florida Rugby, either helping out on the Facebook communication side of things or being part of the board. However you want to reach out to Kerri on Evan on Facebook. Obviously, if you don't have their information, you can reach out to Charlie and I, and we'll certainly provide their emails for you. But everybody, thanks for hanging out with us here on Talking Florida Rugby Occasionally. Again, thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Evan.
Thank you,
Ross. Thank you,
Kerri.
Charlie.
We'll see you guys in a couple of weeks. Live back here on Facebook, on YouTube. Cheers. Charlie, take us home.
Insurance from Chris Ream. Last plug.
That's right. Don't forget our sponsor. Thank you, Kerri, for reminding me. The lifeinsuranceguy.com. Chris Ream. Again, thanks for the sponsorship for tonight's episode. See you guys later.
Bye.